Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There is a figure in Islamic history that, I don't know, some of you might not have heard of. His name is Abu Yazid al-Bustami. He was a Sufi. And what he says in the context of Surah Maryam, I just like and I want to share. He says, okay, first I'll read it. He says, كبت العبادة 30 سنة فرأيت قائلا يقول لي يا يزيد خزائن مملوءة من العبادات فإن أردت الوصول فعليك بالذلة والافتقار والرضا ولذا قال عند دخوله عالم الحقيقة, and so it goes on. So Abu Yazid al-Bustami says that I worshipped for 30 years and I did not arrive. He did not arrive to al-Haqiqah, meaning that he did not arrive to that state of wood where you feel you love Allah and Allah loves you. You have an intimate relationship where you hear the voice of the divine within you. You hear the voice of Allah within you. And where hardships don't break you, and where you meet hardships with a level of serenity and acceptance, as if they're kisses from your beloved, as if your beloved has just kissed you again. So he says, for 30 years I've worshipped, and then he saw a vision, a dream. And it says that your coffers are full of worship for 30 years now. But what you miss, what you do not have in your coffers is the zillah wal iftiqar, is that level of humility in which you completely disciplined your ego, and rida, and acceptance. And only when Abu Yazid al-Bustami worked on that did he reach, and he's one of the great Sufis of history. So to say that, Abu Yazid al-Bustami reached, it's again one of these pearls of wisdom that we should listen to. Okay. Put on ears. Now the world has some noise again.
Alhamdulillah, that was so amazing. So thank you so much. I mean, I know, I saw how hard, as soon as he knew, for people who don't know, he prays, and the way that we choose surahs, the way he chooses surahs to present is through prayer. And so when it became clear that it was Surah Maryam, it was like immediately the weight on his shoulders was like crushing. He was like, I want to pray again, and I want to ask for a different surah. I don't want that one. And of course I was like so excited and so happy. But
that's often our relationship. She's excited and I'm burdened. It's been 30 years of that. Excited, burdened. Excited,
half
burdened.
Full, half empty. Yeah, all of that. But alhamdulillah, it was, I feel like we're starting to get, sort of the women power, themes really emerging now. Starting out talking about hijab. And actually I wanted to say, we have a lovely guest with us today. We were talking after we were on break. The woman who, I think people who have probably read the writings on hijab. Obviously we get a lot of people asking, the question about hijab. And so the last fatwa that is on the Search for Beauty website, if anyone is interested in finding it, it's www.searchforbeauty.org, was largely instigated by a very long email from our guest asking this question about hijab. She grew up wearing hijab her entire life, grew up in a Muslim community, was a high-powered lawyer, doing a lot of work, interfaith in social justice, human rights, and was finding that wearing the hijab was a barrier to her ability to make a difference, because people saw her in hijab and that was enough to really dismiss her and her intelligence. And she's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I don't say that just because she's here, but I mean, I've seen her in action. She's extremely articulate, extremely, just very impressive. And even the way that she approached the due diligence of understanding this whole issue and, wrote very thoughtfully about it and asked Dr. Khalid and waited very patiently for an answer. It just, now we've known each other for years. And so, this was a really difficult test because obviously she's trying to do a lot of good for Islam and the hijab was getting in the way of that. And it was a huge thing in her Muslim community to make the decision to remove the hijab. And when she finally did decide to do that because she felt that it was interfering with her purpose on this earth, the backlash and the blowback was so difficult, and I think it continues to be, that it is a constant test. And so I think a lot of what we learned in this surah was actually very apropos because I think that the level of tests that she and her family have received on a number of different levels has been, enough to shake most people's faith, and yet she's still here and still fighting for a lot of people who need help and who other Muslims actually will not stand up for. So, may Allah bless her. But anyway, so it was a really perfect time for us to discuss this and just to share that. I mean, me personally, one of the things that I think the group here understands is we've been going through these surahs since last summer, and personally, when I see through prayer the particular chapters that have been sent our way in the order in which they've come, and just the messages and the teachings, they're so pertinent to the people that are in this particular group and also in what is happening in the world, that I take them personally as God is directing us, and this is another sort of opportunity to have a very personal revelation given what we're going through. And so I this surah in particular is just, it's so exciting in some ways because I really believe in the power of women, and I really believe in the time is right now that women should be supported and feel empowered to stand up for what they believe in. And we've been in this group through so many tests, and it's been very clear. It's if you're shaking that date tree and you're putting in that effort, and God will come in and help you. And I think it's time for women to rise up. And I think hearing and learning everything that comes across in this surah about the role model, how important women are in the whole Islamic journey. It's just very inspiring. So thank you. And I know he barely got any sleep last night. And I think, may God bless you and protect you. This was amazing. It was really, really wonderful. So thank you.
I'm not a woman, and so I feel very very uncomfortable talking about the hijab. But please understand, I am not opposed to the hijab. What I am opposed to is the dogmatic way that we approach legal issues, including the hijab. When from that same kind, there's a woman in Detroit, right? The woman who was thrown out of the window. A woman who, because of the hijab, because she wants to take off the hijab, her son threw her out of the window and killed her. When I hear something like that, I mean, but at the same time, as I said, there are different contexts in which I will save no effort to defend the right of a woman to exercise that choice. If she believes that this is what Allah wants from her. There is a woman from Kuwait who wrote me recently, again, struggling. I've been intending for a while now to respond to her, but I get so many messages, it's hard. About the hijab, and it's a very personal decision. If after looking at whatever evidence you look at, your conscience is not comfortable, then please do not take it off. If you feel that you are doing something wrong by taking it off, then you shouldn't. Then that is your revelation. But on the other hand, if you are wearing it and you are hating your life, and as has happened sometimes, angry at God, and in a state of constant grievance because of a piece of scarf, then that's out of all proportion, and you probably shouldn't be wearing it, because there's no justification to be angry at God because of a piece of scarf. It is not about hair or not hair. The issue is modesty. And modesty is a very sophisticated institution. There are muhajjabas who have not an air of modesty. I mean, I've seen that in Egypt, and I've seen that in the US. There are muhajjabas that are, frankly, make me, what is that when your face goes red?
Blush.
There are muhajjabas that make me blush, to be really honest. I mean, I've heard some muhajjabas talk in ways that I think if I ever talk this way, I'd probably have a heart attack and die. I mean, in terms of explicitness, I've seen a muhajjaba do a dance on a pole, a stripper's pole. I mean, she's closed, wearing the hijab, but the dance was, I blushed. I was so embarrassed. But at the same time, but there are people, it's not about, it's about modesty. The beauty of modesty. The majesty of modesty. And modesty is something that both men and women can either have or not have. And it's about the way you carry yourself, the way your thought process works, the way your eyes move, the way that you use your mouth and your speech. It's a universe. It is the most beautiful thing in the world. But there's no shortcut to it. You don't just have modesty because you wear a piece of cloth. Modesty is a high virtue. And it's embarrassing when we keep dealing with modesty as if it's just an issue of segregation and clothing. I mean, obviously, certain clothing is immodest by definition, but that's, that's not what we're talking about.
Alhamdulillah. And then the last thing I was going to say is the idea of sacrificing for future generations, when it comes to the idea of women sacrificing, or all of us sacrificing, but supporting women and women taking that extra step to sacrifice for future generations. It's so inspiring because, we see the impact of one one person, one woman. I mean, the women, I know so many super women. And I truly believe, like, I mean, women have the ability, sorry men, but women are amazing. You know, they can do so much. They juggle so much just by the nature of the life that we live in today, the speed we live in, that all the different things that they need to be responsible for and handle. It's like, you know, women have never lived in a time like today where there are so many challenges and so many things to do, the speed of life and the technologies that also advance the speed of life and the expectation for things to get done. And women do it beautifully. And I don't know that men can handle it as well as women can personally. But so that just inspires me that women, I believe women can make all the difference. And so I hope that inshallah more people will hear this. I learned so much. I mean, you know, 27 years as a Muslim, I didn't know so much of this, and other people were saying, you know, they went to Catholic school, you know, didn't even know these things about Maryam and John the Baptist and all of that. So I hope that this knowledge will spread to other people and other women and inspire them to do amazing things. So thank you again. Okay, so who would like to start off the Q&A? Anybody here? Oh, actually, let me ask, what is the dhikr?
Oh, yes. The dhikr is, how could I forget? Unfortunately, I have to, when I remember the surah, I have to remember them in sequence.
So for people who don't know, when I ask the question, what's the dhikr, it's because there are certain dhikr in each chapter that the Shaykh focused on that really opened the meaning for this chapter when he was doing over the course of his life, not just in preparation for this session. Does anyone have a question here? No?
No. Can you just tell the Shaykh that if the hadith is, if you bring happiness to the believers, you please Allah? And I feel really pleased right now.
Jana wanted to tell you about the hadith that if you bring happiness to the believers, you've pleased Allah. And Jana is very, very happy right now.
Oh, alhamdulillah. It brought Jana happiness.
I'm personally tired, but I'm happy I took the 3 hour drive.
Alhamdulillah. Ibrahim is personally very happy. He's tired, but he's very happy.
Did you tell people about Ibrahim? Ibrahim is a hero.
Yeah, I'm so hero-like. I sit on the couch for 24 hours. I just do things.
We have a guest. We probably our youngest member for the halaqas. Ibrahim is 14, and he like sat through almost all of it. Alhamdulillah, and yeah, so we're very proud of you, and may Allah bless you for every moment.
I want to drag Mido to come sit in these halaqas. It's verse 65. That's why. رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما فاعبده واصطبر لعبادته هل تعلم له سميا. 65.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so no takers in the room? Okay, so then I have a question. You mentioned briefly about, you waited for me, thank you so much, about the idea of Maryam being a prophet. And you said that there are different schools that believe that there were various women that were prophets, and then schools that didn't think that she was a prophet. But I just want to get a sense of like majority versus minority. Oftentimes you say, what's the majority view? Like just to know a little more about that.
The minority view is that she was a prophet. And not, again, I'm not, it's not surprising. But it's although it's a minority view, but it some major scholarly names like even Ibn Hazm, who says that she was a prophet, and for them it all hinged on the fact that she received, or she was the object of interaction with the angel Gabriel. That there is evidence, or I mean, there textual evidence that only a Nabi would receive interaction or messages from the angel Gabriel. And since the Quran says that Gabriel did interact with Mary, they argued that she must have been a prophet. The majority view, it says that she wasn't. I'm not. I mean, it's not. They simply. I mean, although there is a distinction between a Nabi and a Rasul brings a book, but a Nabi is someone who receives revelation. But they see her more like as Khidr, a Siddiq, a holy person, rather than a prophet. But yeah, so, but there's it's interesting because the minority view that holds that she's a prophet also holds that there were other female prophets in Islam.
But we don't know anything about them, right?
We do little. I mean, not a lot, but I mean, we could talk about this in another session. The reported female prophets.
Chris, can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yeah.
A follow-up question. Is there, in the tradition, do they speak about the juxtaposition of John the Baptist and Jesus, and Maryam and Zachariah being concerned about the idea of inheritance of his knowledge and prophethood, that could serve as an evidentiary factor for the fact that if you're juxtaposing John the Baptist and Isa and Zachariah and Maryam, that if Zachariah is, then Maryam also is, in terms of inheritance, that Isa is inheriting what Maryam has done, in a sense.
Oh, that's interesting. Whether I don't remember reading anything about Isa inheriting.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is because Zachariah was so worried about Yahya inheriting his role, whether there's any discussion as to Jesus inheriting Maryam's role. I don't remember reading anything about that, but I mean the interesting thing is that there are some who even say that the reason what you do find in some sources is that the argument that in fact it was Maryam who inspired Zachariah to pray for a son after he had given up on the idea. That because he was quite advanced in age, and why hasn't he prayed for it before? And there are some sources that say that the reason that when he saw Maryam was the recipient of a miracle, the food, and that Maryam is the one that tells him, well, if you're worried about an inheritor, have you prayed? And it's interesting that because then Maryam is actually playing an active role in directing Zachariah. So that does exist, and although she's quite young and he's quite old, but he takes her advice. And also, even after the birth of Jesus, Maryam is a central role because although Zachariah's wife is her aunt, and John the Baptist is same age as Jesus, more or less, and all of Zacharias is much older, and her aunt is much older. In the tradition, their interactions, Maryam is always the voice of authority. She's always the one that they go to her for direction and advice. And she's always like the one that is counseling strength and endurance and perseverance, even when they told her that they're very worried about John the Baptist. And she basically says, well, he has to do what he has to do. Go back and tell him to keep doing what he has to do. Which is bringing him into direct clashes with the priestly class, and the priestly class are going to go to the Romans and ask the Romans to kill him. And it's interesting because they never blame Maryam for his fate. She remains sort of the honored figure. There is something that I'm smiling because it's I found this in when I was writing my book on rebellion. I'm convinced that Aisha was the leader of the Battle of the Camel, Ma'arakat al-Jamal, and that she was actually she's the one who led Talha and Zubair. And I think the Shia agree with that, and that's why they don't like Aisha. But anyway, but what's very interesting is that I found many reports in which Aisha is inspired by Maryam in her rebellious role. I mean, that's taken by Orientalists sometimes to exaggeration, because I read an old German article that Aisha wanted to declare herself a prophet like Maryam, but I mean, there was no foundation for that. It was just like typical Orientalist, thing. But it's very interesting. I mean, it's. But at the same time, you had the granddaughter of Sukaina, the granddaughter of Hussein, who also in her poetry says that she and over her hairdo, At-Turra Sukainiya, when they told her, you're stop doing your hairdo and stop doing these, she would have poetry competitions at home. And reportedly, one of her poetry competitions, it was so crowded that her upper level crashed. And when it fell, it killed some people. So they told her, stop doing your poetry competitions at your home, it's a health hazard. And she then cites, I am in the footsteps of Maryam, how dare you tell me to stop doing my poetry competitions. So she was obviously inspiring, both sides. Islamic history needs to be rewritten, people. We need good historians who don't have an Orientalist frame of mind and who understand what it means to do scholarship and have integrity and have a thorough knowledge of the sources, published and unpublished, because our written history sucks. Hours and hours and hours reading secondary sources, 100 hours reading secondary sources is not worth 1 hour reading primary sources, good primary source.
Also, I want to take this moment to let people know if they haven't heard of this or haven't taken the time to listen. The Sheikh gave an incredible halaqah about women jurists in Islamic history, so very pious women, and he was taking encyclopedic references to women who lived in all ages and geographies in our history, and went through, and it was just so insightful, and it's available on our SoundCloud channel, and inshallah we also have plans to publish it in the future. So it's again it was amazing what women were able to accomplish, and just reflecting on those histories was very, very valuable. So, okay, next question. Even though both Jesus and John shared the same ending, why did it have to be a virgin birth for Jesus, whereas for John it was a miraculous birth from a mother who I'm assuming was not a virgin? Also, can we infer from the same verse shared for John and Jesus that peace be upon me, the day I was born and the day I die, could be an evidence that Jesus was crucified like John was?
Yeah, I was afraid I was going to get this question.
What's the question?
The reference in the part I was particularly afraid of is that the peace be upon me the day I'm born, the day I die, and the day I'm resurrected. Because here is a reference to Jesus dying. And of course, Muslim theologians, first let's break the questions into several parts. Part is that John is born to a miraculous birth to an old woman, while Jesus is born to a Virgin Mary. The role that John played in monotheism is very different than the role that Jesus played. In fact, Islamically, John is believed to basically have told his followers that the Messiah was born, the Messiah being Jesus. And so John was a prophet that was directing the gaze towards a more foundational prophet, if you will, Jesus. John didn't have the miracles that Jesus had. John couldn't raise the dead. John, in many ways, John was a prophet more like the reformer prophets, who was outspoken against social injustice, was known for being a baptizer. He believed in the purification of water as a symbolic act, but he was, from an Islamic perspective, he was constantly telling people to follow Jesus, not follow him. And so it is, from an Islamic perspective, it is Jesus who is the real inheritor of Moses, in sense of affirming the monotheism of Moses. And Islamically, Jesus is the one who also tells his followers about the coming prophet from an Islamic person, Ismuhu Ahmad. So John doesn't talk about a prophet named Muhammad who's coming, but Jesus does. Now, so that's the easy part. The hard part is this issue of now. So, if Muslim theological works spend a great deal of time talking about that, well, although Jesus says that peace upon me the day I'm born, the day I die, and the day that I'm resurrected, that Jesus never died, and that Jesus was raised, and that Jesus is still alive. Okay, I'm gonna get into trouble, but
What's new?
Yeah. With all due respect, that's not what I believe. I don't believe that Jesus is alive. Um, uh, um, and I believe there's a minority view in the Islamic tradition that says when Allah says that they did not crucify him and they did not kill him, وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, that it doesn't mean that Allah made them crucify someone in Jesus' place, because that would be unjust for someone else to die so Jesus can get away. But that there are a lot of ways that you can think you've killed me, but you actually haven't. You think you're torturing me, but you actually haven't, because I've left my body. And I mean this in every sense. You could crucify the body and you think the person is there, but Allah's mercy has lifted the soul of that person, and you're just dealing with a corpse. Maybe an animated corpse, but just dealing with a corpse. If you've seen people tortured, you might even have that experience yourself. You could see it. And I believe that that's what Allah is talking about. I don't believe that Allah would allow someone to be crucified in Jesus' stead. And I don't understand the literalism by which people insisted on taking this. My view is not entirely unprecedented. It's a minority view in the Islamic tradition, but I think, and I'm not forcing it on anyone, I might be completely wrong, Allahu Alam, but I just شُبِّهَ لَهُم, that they I can say those who think that they executed Sayyid Qutb, شُبِّهَ لَهُم, they think they executed Sayyid Qutb, but they haven't killed the man. He's a martyr, and he is far more grand than any of the people that think they've killed him. Allahu Alam. I was afraid of that question, but I mean, it's not that I like to be different. I just like to be honest, and I've researched this for so many years, and I've tried very hard to believe in the mainstream position. I tried very hard to believe it, but I just ultimately couldn't swallow it. So, with my apologies for all those who are going to hate me.
Okay, Salam Professor, and thanks for another amazing session. Is there any specific meaning we can extract from the miracle of Isa as speaking in the cradle? Does his precocious speech have a symbolic meaning?
Well, I mean, there is it has always been fascinating why Maryam was not murdered by the priestly class, because the priestly class didn't treat women who they suspected of being impure well. and in fact, stoning was quite common at that time among the Israelites. And uh, and I mean stoning to death, which they've done quite carelessly, and that's what was one of the objections that Jesus had to the practice, that they didn't even care very much about evidentiary standards. So from there's this pragmatic thing, is that something made these people stop in their tracks and not stone Maryam, and not come back later and try to kill her, although they continued to say that she's this and she's that. So I mean, if you have a child that says something coherent, I mean, that would stop you. So I can see this miracle as being a very awesome way to get these men to lay off and leave the poor woman alone. So that's one thing. But it is quite remarkable. There is a minority view that says that when that Jesus didn't speak as an infant, but spoke when he was 2 or 3 years old. But there is no basis for that. I mean, I don't know. So I don't put much weight on that opinion. But I think the statement affirms that the moral principle itself, that a child and must be a source, part of the ethical framework. If you imagine the Quran is built ethics of a society, and part of the necessary ethics for a society, that a child must be a source of rahmah, mercy and compassion upon their parents, and that regardless of the hardship and misery that their parents might be in, because Mary was in a very difficult situation, the child must always honor the parents. Because if children don't honor the parents, the entire structure for upholding virtue and morality will fall apart. And I've always taken the declarations about John the Baptist and Jesus about what they say, because it's, belief in God, and right after belief in God, I honor my parents. I honor and it's remarkable. But society, I mean, when you read enough history, you really realize that the first thing that starts undoing the fabric of a civilization, if children no longer see a good reason to respect and dignify their parents, and then so much falls apart, including the desire of parents to have children. Now, of course, it's reciprocal, because parents also have to act in a virtuous and ethical way, because if you notice, the earmark of the parenting in the Quran is one in which parents, once they have their children, they sacrifice all for their children. They're not egocentric or narcissistic. You know, they don't tell their kids, once you're 18, go, it's, you know, you're on your own. Or, you know, go work in a 7-Eleven to have pocket money. I think these are all just...
You have a question?
Yeah.
Come up and you need
Okay.
to speak it into the...
My bad.
It's
I don't
okay.
know how this works.
Or you could just repeat what he says. If you
No,
want.
That's
we
okay.
want
I have
to
legs.
give
I am
Ibrahim
able to walk.
the chance to express.
How can you respect your parents when one of those parents is dishonorable?
Great question.
Or honor
You
your
know,
parents?
if your parent is, you don't respect what they do, but you treat them with respect. Meaning, you don't obey them when they tell you to do something wrong. That's not, respect doesn't mean obedience. There's a big difference between respect and obedience. I can disobey you, but I can still respect you. I can say, you know, I respect you, I respect the fact that you think you're right, but I am not going to do what you're telling me to do because I don't believe that this is the right thing. Now this is, I'm talking about parents that are dishonorable, meaning dishonest, or they live in the wrong way, or they lie, or they cheat, or they commit a lot of injustice, unfortunately, as we've seen in a lot of parents these days. But what you respect, meaning that they still have rights that are given to them by God. So you don't yell at them, you don't strike them, you don't insult them. Yes, you're not going to, you know, if they tell you to do something wrong, you're not going to do it, but that doesn't mean that you yell at them or you insult them or you strike them. And eventually, when they get old and they think back about their life and realize that they've messed up things, and they will be very sorry and they will live in regret. And they need their children, you help them as much as you can. You don't just ignore them so that they end up homeless and somewhere in some alley. Muslims don't do that. But you know, a lot of parents that are dishonorable, it's because their egos obscure their vision. And rest assured, the time will come, they will grow old and they will think back and they will regret all the garbage they've done. And you feel sad for them because nothing is worse than to get to a point in your life where you're old and you've lost the respect of your children. That's the worst curse. And learn from what you've seen so you never do what they've done. You know, it is quite true that the worst thing about abusive parents is that they curse their children to repeat their behavior. It's really true. So you have to be really diligent to never repeat what wrong you've seen them do. You just have to study it, reflect on it, and vow in every whichever way never to do the same thing with your own children. Because just think of how horrible for a child to go through when their parent is being so lousy. It's so unfair. It's so unfair.
Thank you, that was a really important.
Good question.
Excellent question. I mean, we have several other questions, but I'm also worried that we are getting close to Maghrib time. So we could either go another question and then pray, or if you want to take a few more questions, I don't know.
I tell you what, let's pray and then we'll come back. I'll take a couple more questions and then
And then
stop.
Okay.
So, okay, we'll pray Maghrib.
Quickly.
Everyone go pray Maghrib. I mean, no, we're gonna pray Maghrib, but
And then we'll be back.
Okay.
inshallah. Okay, well, sorry, it's gonna be just my choice on which one, so, what does it mean specifically to bring happiness to others? And is one of the reasons God created us to be happy? And look at this question.
okay, yeah, that's one of the things I really hope will I've written an article about happiness in Islamic theology, and one of the things I hope that my articles will somehow be collected and published as a book, because
Yes, inshallah, we are working on that too.
That should be easy, right?
anyway,
I started it, yeah.
happiness is in itself a form of what makes us special as human beings, because our ability both to laugh and cry, as we've talked about in one of the earlier surah, is cited by Allah as part of the miracle of creation. But especially remember that it is a fundamental principle in Islamic ethics and law. دفع الضرر والضرر يزال, meaning harm in whatever form, and harm is whatever brings pain, and which includes all forms of misery. It becomes a priority to seek the removal of pain and to bring an end to pain. But beyond that, when we talk about happiness especially in the context of this hadith and many of the other hadiths like that, it is whatever brings a human being a sense of safety and security. So addressing the material needs of someone is happiness. I mean, and it's a core happiness, because if you're starving, obviously, or if you make someone more secure in their living conditions, that's a happiness. But even if you're even saying assalamu alaikum or smiling at someone, you're rewarded at that, because it is spreading a sense of goodness. It is bringing. Now, of course, we don't mean by happiness cheap distractions. I mean, that's not the. But But sometimes even cheap distractions you could be rewarded for. So if you go to a lonely child and you play a video game with them and you do it, especially because you want to be kind to that child, you're rewarded for that. Yes, it is a form of happiness. We don't pursue happiness as the only moral virtue, because we understand that there are other moral virtues that must enter into the balance. But among the moral virtues that we do pursue is happiness. And that a Muslim is, the point of a Muslim is not to be miserable. And in fact, it is, if one of the things that strikes you about the Seerah is that although these people, lived in persecution, and after that, even after Medina, they were from one battle to the other and in a constant state of siege. But I'm always struck by the fact that these were fundamentally happy people. They were not. They would cry out of reverence for Allah and out of love for Allah, but they were happy people. Their affairs were not the affairs of people living in misery. And somehow I think that's missed in the way that we think about Islam. Any application of Sharia that brings shaqa, that brings misery and sadness to people, is illegitimate. Because Sharia is being used to bring haraj, and that cannot be legitimate. It's just simply not legitimate.
Did you have a question? Okay. All right, last question. Thank you so much for yet another beautiful journey through the Quran. My question is pertaining to verse 87. Quote, "No one will have power to intercede except for those who have permission from the Lord of mercy." One, what does it mean to, quote unquote, have power to intercede? And two, what does it mean to have permission? And three, do we have any indication about who are those granted permission? I often struggle to understand the significance of intercession and would love to understand what intercession means in general in the Quranic context and what it means in the context of this surah specifically.
Well, the issue of Shafa'ah is a big theological question, but we know that Shafa'at al-Anbiya is already something well established. The intercession of prophets on behalf of their ummah, on behalf of people. One of the reasons that it is a very good idea to say things like sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as many salawat and taslim on the Prophet ﷺ, is that you want the intercession of the Prophet on your behalf. And the more you do that, the more likely that the Prophet ﷺ would intercede on your behalf. But although there are theological debates that go back and forth, if I can summarize at least where I stand on the discussion of intercession. There is ample evidence from the Quran and from the Sunnah that the pious people will be able, with Allah's permission, to intercede on behalf of loved ones. Now, so that does mean if a parent is particularly pious, they might be able to intercede on behalf of a child. If a child is particularly pious, they might be able to intercede on behalf of a parent. A Now, we believe that the principle of intercession cannot violate the principle of justice, because Allah promised us justice, and we know that Allah is just. So intercession that violates the principle of justice is completely inconsistent with Islamic theology, because Islamic theology rejected the idea that someone can die for the sins of others and then suddenly you're just forgiven because someone suffered for your sins. But there are many forms of intercession which do not violate the principle of justice, and where, as a part of the heartfelt prayers of the pious, could appeal to Allah. The idea of intercession became exaggerated because in the modern age, with the rise of the Salafi movement, Wahhabi movement in particular, but Salafi movement more generally, there was a very anti-Sufi momentum. And of course, that Wahhabi movement took over Mecca and took over the Hijaz, and part of the anti-Sufi rhetoric was to attack the concept of intercession, and to do so vehemently that it really went overboard. While it's understandable to want to combat the idea that just because you followed a qutb, that this qutb can decide that all his students may enter heaven regardless of their actions, because that's of course a corruption of the theology in itself. But I think that it ended up that we've raised a generation of Muslims thoroughly confused about intercession, believing that all forms of intercession are unjust. And it doesn't take a lot of reflection to realize that that's not necessarily the case. And especially when, as we've studied in some surahs, if you read the Quran very carefully, that there is a premium on the hope that you would be able to enter heaven with your loved ones. Mm-hmm. And yes, enter heaven with your loved ones, as long as doing so doesn't violate the principle of justice. And that's very well supported in the tradition. And so it is one of the incentives for people to work very hard to improve their position with Allah is in the hope of being able to intercede for loved ones who might have not had a fair opportunity in life. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. That was beautiful, and thank you for an amazing session. I think everybody really is so grateful. So alhamdulillah. And on that note, we will inshallah see you guys on Tuesday.